3, 1, go.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Public Safety Facilities Advisory Committee meeting. This is a public meeting that's being televised tonight here on Auburn Cable. Today is November 6th, about 7 p.m. We're getting started. Is anybody else recording in the audience other than the recordings that we have going on here for the television? No. Okay. We'll get started tonight. Tonight is our public input of our meeting. We're going to start off by having Town Manager Julie Jacobson give an introduction to this the process we're involved in here.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. First of all, I just want to thank the committee. The committee's just done an outstanding job. They've been together since the end of August, and you've had several meetings now. I just want to give the public the opportunity to understand why we're here tonight, and then I'm going to turn it right over to the chair and those who are going to be presenting tonight. So approximately a year and a half ago, town meeting approved of $150,000 for us to conduct a feasibility study on all three of our public safety facilities, the police station and the 2 fire stations. And we had to put together, under Mass General Law, a designer selection committee, which we did, and that was made up of 5 people, and a couple of those are now on our committee that you'll see this evening. And that committee, we solicited RFPs, which are requests for proposal, and we reviewed them, and we selected Tecton Architects to be the consultant to work with us on this, and they've just done a phenomenal job. Earlier this summer, we, after Tecton started to do all the initial data research, we put together a committee, and it's the Public Safety Facility Feasibility Advisory Committee. Long title, but also a long list of things that they are tasked with doing. And I will turn it over to Kevin, but just wanted to let the public know that they have had several public meetings. We've been talking about this now for about a year and a half, and we're here to explain to you where we are in the process right now, and solicit any input that we can, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of other opportunities as this process proceeds. This is a very lengthy process. This isn't anything that happens overnight. No decisions are made this evening or anywhere in the immediate future, because there's still a lot of work to be done. But I want to thank every member of the committee for doing this. We actually started off seeking a committee of 7, and we had probably 20 applications, so we increased the committee to 11 to try to get as much representation from the community as we could. So I want to thank you, and thanks for the opportunity, and good luck with it tonight.
Thank you. Okay, just as Julie's mentioned, the committee that's here, I just want to do a quick introduction so the public knows who's up here and who's involved. Myself, I am I'm sorry, what? We can do a pledge of allegiance. We have not done it particularly, but we'll certainly we can start off with a pledge. So we get the flag behind us. Stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm just going to go around the table up here, do quick introductions. John Dowd, down the end, trying to hide behind the screen. Mark Moss, who was a retired lieutenant from the Auburn Police Department. Stephanie Hayward, current sergeant for the Auburn Police Department. Ms. Kim O'Brien, a current firefighter for the Auburn Fire Department. Deputy Chief Glenn Johnson from the Auburn Fire Department. Myself, I'm Kevin Kennedy. We have Rocco Morano, who's my vice chair. Ken Charlton, sergeant for the Auburn Police Department. Julie Belunas. Did I pronounce it correctly, Julie? No, I didn't. You can correct.
No, you did.
Did I? Okay.
You got it.
Rick Ringard, and also retired Chief of Robert Murray, representing us as well. So we've got there's some public safety background here. There's some just folks who have had long-term interests in the community. And so as a group, just to give a little bit of a background of what we've done to date, we've been tasked with looking at the existing facilities, looking at the conditions of the existing facilities, looking at the existing sites, and trying to make some recommendations as this process goes forward based upon that. So the goal of tonight's public meeting, through having folks here in the room, as well as having this televised on TV and have presentations from the fire department, the police department, and the architects that have been hired by the town, is to give you sort of the information that we've been looking at over the last number of weeks. Like the town manager said, nothing really has been determined, or we're just sort of, everything's sort of out there being looked at and examined, as will be a lengthy process as we move forward with that. So we started out, sort of our education was learning about public safety facilities and different regulations and insurance industry standards and a whole array of things that had not come to mind for a lot of us anyhow. We got tours of the existing facilities. That was over the course of a couple nights. And then we sat down and looked at a whole host of sites that the architects had drawn out some plans and determinations and some conceptual layouts as to where facilities may or may not go and why those sites may or may not work for us. So the goal tonight, I think the way we're going to try and run this, some of the presenters said they would prefer to take questions throughout the presentation. For instance, if they get to a part that talks about the West Auburn Fire Station and you have a question relative to that, they may be willing to accept that at that point. If that starts to bog down the meeting too much, I may just sort of put a hold to that and we'll save the questions for the end. But if you have a question as you're going along, raise your hand. I'll ask you to stand. Please identify yourself so they can hear you for the record, and make that question to the presenter. But we'll see how that goes. So we're going to start off. The fire department is going to have the first component of the presentation. Chief Coleman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, members of the public, both in the room and at home. Can everybody hear me? Chris, I don't have the mic on. Thank you. So as the chairman mentioned, the goal of tonight is just to sort of highlight the existing facilities, both at the fire department, headquarters, Station 2, and the police department, answer any questions that we have. That's sort of the goal tonight. And then Dennis and Matt from the architectural firm, they're going to come up at the end and sort of talk about their piece. So let me just skip these through. These are some of Kevin's slides. So let's talk a little bit about a look at fire headquarters. The current building that we're occupying at 47 Auburn Street opened on June 7th, 1964 as a 6-bay garage, 1-story building, and there's 2 bays that are in the back of the building. So when you're looking at the front of the station from Auburn Street, it's 4 bays, but there are 2 additional bays in the back of the building. Housed in the station at that time was the same complement of vehicles that we house in there today. Although the needs have changed in terms of certain specialties, the department's added ambulances. So at this time, it was all fire suppression type equipment. But although the equipment has changed in its operation, it's essentially the same number. And at the time that the station opened in 1964, I think one of the things that's extremely important to remember is that the station was designed and opened with really no thought of full-time staff in mind. So when the station opened, it was the 6 bays. It was 1 office for the fire chief, 1 office for the administrative clerk, a sitting room for the firefighters, a men's locker room, and a workshop. That was it. That was what the fire station was designed for. There were no women's locker rooms. It was 1 large men's locker room. So there really wasn't, in 1964, any thought that the department would move towards a full-time complement as we have today. Now, in 1995, Bay Path Regional High School added the 2nd floor onto the fire station. And the goal of adding the 2nd floor was not only to increase some storage, but to increase the administrative space on the 1st floor. They added a couple offices for the fire chief. We created a communications room. We added an office for the daytime captain. And then upstairs, the kitchen was relocated to the upstairs. We added some storage, and we added 1 large training room because we did not have any space where the department could hold a meeting or training. And again, when you look at what the configuration of the station is today, it looks nothing like it did in 1995, and we've essentially we've lost our training space, we've lost our storage. That's all sort of disappeared, again, as the full-time complement has grown over the years. I'm not going to list all of the vehicles. I know that Chris is showing these slides on cable, but we run a couple of ambulances, some specialized vehicles, engine, tower truck, rescue. Those are all vehicles that currently run out of fire headquarters. Now, the picture on the left is what the station looked like in 1964 when the building was open. And the picture on the right is the current fleet that we have. The photo was just taken a few days ago. But one of the things that I want to point out is when you look at the photo on the left, look at the size difference of the vehicles parked in front of the apparatus. Especially the one on the right, that's our rescue, the white vehicle on the far end, that's the rescue. Look to the left of it as to how much footage there actually is from the truck to the other side of the bay door. Where our current rescue sits today, it's in the same bay on the far right, but the bay is almost not visible. So in 1964, when the station opened, they figured it for 4 trucks in the front and 4 trucks in the back. 2 vehicles still didn't have bay doors, but they were parked in between. But when you looked at it from a square footage perspective, because of the size of the vehicles at that time, there was a lot more free space around the vehicles to operate. Over the last 50 years, as fire apparatus has gotten larger, that square footage within the bay space has shrunk. So we don't have the kind of free movement around vehicles that we did in 1964 when the station opened. This is our current tower truck that's pulled out of the bay, and what that black line on the screen represents is that's the delineation from our parking lot to Auburn Street. So when we pull the vehicle out, in order to do our morning truck checks, if we're washing the vehicle, anytime that there's a firefighter standing in front of the tower, they're actually standing on Auburn Street in order to do anything in the front of the vehicle. Our resources, this is just a photo of some of the resources that we have in the back as far as emergency response trailers from emergency management, special operations. We house some regional and district assets back there, which not only chews up parking space, but a lot of these things are undercover and exposed to the elements. Our employee parking lot is the same parking lot that is used for the public park. For those who don't know, or just as a reminder, Goddard Memorial Park is behind the fire station. It is a public park, but employees of the fire department and the park, we actually share parking. So this is what sort of a normal day shift would look like, but in the morning, during shift change, all of these, parking spaces are full. So it really depends on what's going on in the fire station. It may or may not allow for public parking for the park. The architects will talk about this a little more, but one of the things that we want to do through this process is just highlight everything, get everything out there that's on the table. The fire station at headquarters, it is located within a FEMA flood zone. When we talk about potential expansion or renovation of any facilities, it is just extremely important to note that depending on what the level of expansion and renovation is on a facility, it will render the municipality ineligible for federal grants. And why that's important is that the community receives many federal grants that range anywhere from emergency management to education funding and grants for the fire rescue department. Just within the last 6 years, the fire department has received over $1 million in federal grants. So it's just something that it needs to be taken into consideration because there is long-term impacts to that decision. So this is just showing some of the space issues. Again, when you look at that vehicle or the picture of the smaller vehicles outside, and now you come and look on the inside, these are some of the conditions that we're facing inside. So this photo on the left, it makes passing between the front of the vehicles and the garage doors very narrow. Sometimes, firefighters have to turn sideways depending on what truck they're actually walking in front of. And then the vehicles parked next to each other. You can see the tight quarters there. In some cases, there's only 1.5 to 2 feet of space. Some of the exhaust, the vehicle exhaust. It doesn't actually allow the vehicle exhaust system to be put on because it's in close proximity and it will rub up against the other side of the truck. So doing, daily truck checks, inspections, it makes it very difficult to do those without actually physically getting in, moving the vehicle outside, or pulling the vehicle up just in order to navigate around the vehicle. This is the back of our rescue truck. There's only a foot of space. In this back cabinet is actually where the Jaws of Life and other rescue equipment sits. So in the morning, firefighters typically have to open the bay door and they have to pull the truck up just a little bit in order for them to pull the equipment out. It becomes, cumbersome just to do daily checklists and equipment checks, especially in inclement weather when you got to open bay doors and pull trucks up a couple of feet just so you can access equipment in the rear of them. Recently, we were fortunate enough, the town meeting appropriated funding that we could get a turnout gear extractor, basically a heavy-duty washing machine for our turnout gear. We have had no other space in the fire station to put it. It had to be in a location that was accessible to a drain. So we actually used to have a sink where that washing machine is placed now that was sort of just a general maintenance sink for mop buckets and things like that. So we lost the sink that was on the apparatus floor in order to be able to tie the washing machine into that drain. As the architects will talk about in a little bit, when we talk about clean rooms and laundering turnout gear, these should be in clean rooms, not just on the general apparatus floor, right out administrative areas, general on the apparatus floor. And again, it's only 2.5 feet in width, so we really kind of narrowed down the walkway going from the front of the station to the back of the station. Space is the issue. One of the questions that I've been asked over the last several months as we've been working on these projects is, we're talking about structural condition and things like that. One of the things that I want to point out is that the issues with our building are not structural. We take a tremendous amount of pride in our buildings. As a department and as a town, we maintain the buildings. Adequate resources are put towards general maintenance, capital, in order to improve certain things when we need to. So these are not structural issues, and I just want to make sure that we're clear that the buildings are not falling down around us. That's not the issue. The issue is that we're operating in facilities that were designed for a completely on-call fire department with no thought of full-time expansion, and you fast forward 50-plus years later, and we have a career staff of 40 full-time firefighters that work rotating shifts trying to operate in these buildings. Space is the issue. Space has always been the issue, going right back to the mid-'90s when Chief Bellhumer got Bay Path High School to come out and put the second floor. That was the whole point of that addition, just to try to expand a growing department. So it becomes a challenge when we're trying to do things, something as simple as just adequate space for drying equipment. For those that have been to the fire station, it's an open apparatus floor. There's not really a lot of doors that go off the apparatus floor. We lost part of the workshop that was originally designed. That has since been divvied up into thirds. A third of it is a shop, a third of it is our EMS supply room, and a third of it is a supervisor's office, which we had to construct. So even from the original storage space in 1964, we're only operating with a third of that storage space that we were 50 years ago. So even things as simple as drying equipment like turnout gear, cold water suits, there's just no adequate space to do it. So what we typically do is we set up ladders, ground extension ladders or folding ladders, and we just hang the equipment on the folding ladders. We hang gear. This is a little piece of pipe on a rope that we hang wet turnout gear. We hang it off the back of doors of vehicles, anywhere that we can find space just to utilize. It's not that, if we could come up with some, sort of, creative space or make space to buy the proper equipment in order to dry, we would do that. There's just no place to put it. So these are the things that we resort to. I would encourage anybody to give me a call so we can tour if you ever wanted to tour the facility, you will see that we are using every possible inch of space in that building for storage that we can. So in the mid-'90s, when they added the second floor, we basically lost the men's locker room that was originally constructed because they needed a place to put the staircase in order to access the second floor. So this space that you're looking at on these two pictures on the left, that is what used to be the men's locker room, which now houses the staircase to go to the second floor. But what we did was, Chief Bellhumer put a little door in there. The height of that door is 5 feet tall. And when you go in there, we have storage, file storage underneath the stairs. So we store equipment in there. My administrative assistant stores files in there. So oftentimes she's going through this 5-foot door under the staircase in order to access stuff. Same thing with the upstairs. Basically on the top side of that staircase, we put in a little door that kind of magically hovers in the middle of the wall. The door height is 4.5 feet, and you have to step a couple of feet up in order to get into that storage space. But that's where we store, basic general cleaning supplies and those kind of things. So this is a space that's accessed every day by somebody opening up that little door, hiking up in there, bending over, getting what supplies they need, and jumping back out. So I think we've been extremely creative in terms of utilizing all of the square footage within the building that we can. So this is the original storage space that was built, and when you read, I actually have the original specs from '64 in my office typed, and when you read it, it says that it called for a storage room of a certain square footage with mezzanine storage. Well, this is what we got from mezzanine storage. It's basically the room, and it's 3 feet of height on top, but with no staircase to get up there. So there's no actual way to get up on top. So when we have to go up onto the mezzanine, we have to take that yellow ladder that's secured to the wall, open it up, climb up, and then we can only store things, really, you can see in the photo, we only store things along the edge, because you have to crawl on your hands and knees in order to get into the middle if you wanted to store something in the middle. So it's not a safe practice, so we maintain and we just keep the storage sort of just on that front end. Again, when you look at this particular space, the photo on the left, at one time, this was predominantly storage, and on the far left was a boiler room. This room now, the black lines on the photo indicate how we've divided that storage room up into thirds. The far right is storage, the middle is our EMS supply room, and the far left is our shift captain's office on the far left. This is our lobby. This lobby, again, in 1964, the station was not open. It was all on call. People made appointments to meet with the fire chief if they had issues or inspections. So this lobby was not designed for the kind of foot traffic that the building sees today on a daily basis with residents, contractors, everybody that's coming in to do their business. The total square footage of the lobby is 42 square feet. If you have 3 people standing in the lobby, which we do oftentimes, the lobby is crowded. You can't move in the lobby. We get a lot of walk-in medicals, so sometimes there'll be somebody at the window doing business, someone will come in, they have a medical emergency, and then there's really no place to bring them other than getting into the secured side of the fire station and bringing them sort of right into the administrative assistant's office and dealing with the medical emergency there. Our current conference room, which is right off of the apparatus floor, it's 170 square feet. It holds no more than 13 people, and I'll use the word comfortably, but I'll use that word very loosely. There's 8 chairs around the table. Sort of on the right side, you can put 3 chairs sort of back there up against the wall, but that's about it. So it makes it very difficult. We have no space to hold a department meeting, but let alone even general command staff meetings. We don't have any training space when we run our Citizens Fire Academies. We typically do that on the apparatus floor with folding chairs and tables. So, and again, this space has seen many different renditions over the years. This was once a larger conference space, but then this again was subdivided. So the deputy fire chief had an office, so we lost half of the conference room size. So the footprint, the general footprint of the building has not changed in 50 years. The only thing that's changed is we just keep carving it up and boxing it up and just kind of encroaching on the square footage. A look at Station 2. Station 2 was originally built in 1951 as the Randall Elementary School, and the fire department opened it as an unmanned substation on March 17, 1984. Retired Fire Chief Bob Murray, who's sitting here on the end, he was the fire chief at the time in 1984, brought this proposal to the town, and he was the fire chief that opened this as an unmanned substation because of the growth in West Auburn. There was the insurance industry had been making recommendations for a sub-fire station out in the West End for almost 40 years before the chief was able to open this in 1984. The one thing that is extremely important just to remember about this station is that in 1984, Chief Murray appropriated $80,000 to put 3 bay doors into the building, which basically go onto the old elementary school cafegimatorium. Okay? That is about it. There have been, minor repairs. There have been, some, spaces added, like sitting rooms and things like that. For the most part, all done by the firefighters. But the bulk of what was done in the station was done in 1984 by putting those 3 bay doors in. Only recently, within the last year, our firefighters dismantled the actual stage that was on the apparatus floor. The cafeteria tables are still in the walls. The bubblers are still in the walls. We used to use the stage for storage, but we've outgrown the space inside. We had to rip the stage down, so we gutted the stage out so we could, just kind of utilize that floor. It's just the major challenge with this station is that it's an elementary school. It was never designed to be a fire station. So it's not even that it's a 60-plus-year-old fire station. It's a 60-plus-year-old elementary school. And operationally, we do the best we can with trying to fit our operation around the building that we have, but there is nothing designed in this building that suits or fits emergency services. This is what the building looks like today. It hasn't really changed much. Out of this station, this is a staffed fire station with 3 or 4 firefighters, depending on how many are working that day. We respond with an engine, an ambulance, a supervisor, and our reserve spare engine is in that station. We also have a marine unit. Our main dive boat runs out of that station. And because our limitations at fire prevention are so great at headquarters, we actually run our fire prevention and inspection division out of West Street, which does make things day-to-day complicated. The fire inspectors report directly to me, but I don't see them as much as I would like to during the day. We do a lot more on the telephone, so it does make it challenging because, again, a lot of people come to headquarters looking to speak to the fire inspector, and they're in a different location. But from a space perspective, this is really the only place that we can put them. Most of these vehicles during this kind of weather, they sit outside. 3 of these vehicles sit outside, but when we get into inclement weather season, it gets a little more crunched in that building because we try to kind of move some things around. We put vehicles in between vehicles just to keep them out of snow. Again, one of the vehicles, the vehicle on the right is the supervisor's vehicle. For many years, until we kind of were able to open that stage up and spread things out a little bit, the supervisor's vehicle sat outside, snow covered. They were minutes behind other responding units because they were trying to clean snow off the windshield and all of those things. So now that we've dismantled the stage, we're able to kind of fit a few more things in there, but again, it's not optimal. So again, the fire prevention office works out of there. It's just challenging with our day-to-day and operations. One of the things that you're going to hear from the architects later when they speak is proper storage of turnout gear. As everybody knows, cancer is a very big deal in the fire service today. We're learning a lot more things in terms of cancer prevention and why firefighters are coming down with cancer at the rates that they are. And a lot of it has to do with contamination of turnout gear and where that's stored. Again, this is not an ideal situation. It's not the way that I want it to be, but we do the best we can with what we have. But right now, our spare turnout gear, after it's laundered, it actually sits in the living quarters side of the fire station right outside the locker room. So that photo on the left is the locker room at Station 2, and on that rack is spare coats, spare pants. This should not be in the living side of a fire station at all, but there's really nowhere else to put it. This is gear that's not assigned to members. It's spare gear in the event that someone has something damaged or things like that. On the right side, you'll see that there's a shelf with trash bags on the back. Every firefighter has 2 sets of turnout gear. We don't have enough space or racks, so all of the firefighters' second sets of turnout gear are folded, put in black trash bags, tied up, and then they're stored on that shelf. And if their primary set of gear is contaminated, when they're laundering it, they go to Station 2. Everybody's gear is stored at Station 2. They have to go to Station 2, find their trash bag, rip it open, get their gear, and then start the process over when their primary set is done. Again, you can also see equipment. We are washing turnout gear more than we ever have with what we know now about the contaminants that we face. So there is, on a weekly basis, there is turnout gear somewhere laying around the fire station, being laundered, drying. Here you see it out at Station 2. It's on the boat. All of the turnout gear is separated on the boat, and this is how we're drying it. This is the Station 2 locker room. Again, very small square footage, under 100 square feet. More than 3 people can't be at the locker room at a time. Both male and female firefighters share this locker room. We do not have separate facilities. Again, not designed, I believe this at one time was food storage for the kitchen of the elementary school. So again, the original staffing of the department, the current building was constructed for an all-on-call department, and the first full-time staffing came in 1986 with a chief, 3 firefighters, and a full-time inspector, so they were 4 total. Our current staffing today, we have 36 firefighters, 28 of those are paramedics, 8 EMTs, a fire chief, a deputy fire chief, an administrative assistant, and 2 fire inspectors. So that totals 40 employees within the department between the 2 stations. So again, it's you know, when you look at, I don't think anybody thought in 1964 when the building opened that the town would have grown and that the services would have grown to the point that they did. And again, a lot of that is driven by our call volume. Outside the city of Worcester, we are the busiest fire rescue department in southern Worcester County. We're the 6th busiest fire rescue department in all of Worcester County. You can see here from 2012 up to present day, we've had a steady 2.5% to 3% increase in our call volume every year for the last 10 years, and we are on pace. This slide was done yesterday. It's over 3,200 now, but we're on pace this year to hit 3,800 plus calls. So it'll be another year of a 2.5% increase in call volume, and there's no sign of that slowing down. So it's a busy fire station. It's an active fire station. You know, there's something going on every day. I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Lemon for a look at the police department.
Chief, can we just see if we have any fire-specific questions before we move on to the police
Does
department?
anybody have any questions before I move on?
Certainly feel free to save them to the end if you want, or if you have questions now for the chief while they're fresh in your mind.
If you do, just let me know.
So clearly, Chief Coleman has taken some classes in public speaking. I've complimented him for that. My name's Todd Lemon. I'm the operational lieutenant for the Auburn Police Department, and Chief Slucas asked me to, a little over a year ago, to take on this task to consider the possibility with this committee that was formed to look at the feasibility study, to sit in with the committee to provide information. So the best way for me to walk through this is to kind of take you down a quick trip down memory lane. So the police station that you're looking at is where I started as a young patrolman, and that's the facility that was across the street from the Sears Auto Center, and it was directly next door to Cason and Foster. So I'm told from my predecessors when I started there that was a 20-year building. It was purchased. They built the building, they built the facility, and it lasted about 20 years. And when the contractor built the building, the contractor came back to the town and said that they could put on a second floor for a few $1,000s more. I was told it was under $5,000. And the town either did not want to do that or didn't have the funding. When I moved into the building, we were stacked up pretty tight in there, but it worked. It was a great location. That being the center part of Auburn, And we joke about it, and we talk about it to this day. I mean, there were times that when after the mall was built, with the amount of shoplifters and thefts that happened in that particular area, sometimes we wouldn't even have to get into our police cruisers to go apprehend the criminals. We'd walk outside the building and we'd catch them as they were running across the street. So Chief Ron Miller was actually quite ingenious. After we moved into that building and he realized that did not meet our facility needs, he realized what the value of the property was, and he realized at the time, because there was a big growth explosion in the town of Auburn because of our proximity and our geographical location, that he realized he could command a decent sum of money to potentially build us a new facility. So I was not part of that process, but I'm told that the property sold for about $900,000 and that the town had to borrow $2 million. So it was a $3 million facility that got the town through 20 years. Well, let me move through these. We'll be going through this. We'll be sitting here for a while. So if you recognize that young man there, whose hair was a little less gray back then, that was Chief Slucas back in that old building. And that building served the department well for a long period of time. And we were excited to move into the new facility. There were a lot of other properties that were looked at, specifically in the town because of the geographical location. We needed to have access to different roadways and highways, and that site and location was perfect. We were able to get that piece of property on Oxford Street, and we moved there in 2000. All right, let me hear. Steve just told me out here with the screen. Did it move forward? I did. Oh, here we go. Enter. So we built it at a different time than today. As you can see, it was designed initially for one dispatcher. And full disclosure, when the building was built, we moved into it, and we realized it was problematic from day one. It was problematic because they designed the building with the cell lockups downstairs. So not to bore you with statistics, but since about 2002, we average about 22,000 calls a year. We probably arrest about 550 to 600 people a year. The arrest statistics have gone down with some of the law changes. And because of Mass General Law requirements on prisoner lockups, we realized it was problematic having the lockup downstairs because we have to do physical checks depending on the type of prisoner that we have every 15 to 30 minutes. So what happened was we found out as soon as we moved into the building, we had to pull police officers off the road because we weren't able to remove the dispatchers from the desk from answering the 911 calls. So that essentially doubled our dispatching staff overnight once we worked in there. At the time when we moved in, we probably had, at that particular time, about 18 people working, depending on positions that were filled or unfilled at the time. Currently, right now, we have 40 slots, 40 sworn police officers. We don't have any part-time personnel. We have 9 full-time dispatchers, and we have 2 clerical staff that are full-time, and we do have part-time dispatchers. And you'll see as I get further into these slides, go through these. Now, this was just taken the other day. This is out in front of the police station, and as you'll see very shortly, we have drones now that both the fire and the police use. I pulled into the parking lot, and we've realized for a long period of time that parking was a minimum. That section of property, the police station currently exists, is a crescent. It's basically the shape of a moon. And my predecessor, Lieutenant Moss, the retired Lieutenant Moss, worked diligently with the town to expand the parking lot. If some of you remember, one of the years that we actually had a Citizens Police Academy, one of our attendees, our residents from town, was hit by a car crossing the street because the people are forced to park across the street at the skating arena. So this picture that you're looking at here, you can see we had normal business day to day. We had people meeting in a training room, and we're double parked and parked on the grass. You can see that on slide 2, you can see police cruisers and vehicles parked across the street at the skating arena. Unfortunately, we have that there. There's an aerial view showing the parking lot upwards and down below, and again, I want to point out that both of those lots have been expanded upon since its original build, and they do not have adequate parking for current staffing. There's essentially, after we moved in, within a year or two, we ran completely out of locker space. The town has been fortunate to have a facilities department that has been able to come in and modify closets that were originally used for other purposes or equipment, to modify them and make them into lockers. There is currently not enough locker space for the office's equipment, and as time changed, our equipment has changed. With our radio equipment, communications, and weaponry, and defensive equipment that requires the equipment to be locked up. So this yard sale that you're looking at down in this photo right here, this is our evidence and storage room. There's chairs that are up on we're completely out of room there. And bear in mind that a lot of these cases with a lot of this evidence and property that's in here, those are current cases that we have to maintain the property. We're required, not only through the courts, but we're required under Mass General Law and under the records keeping to keep these cases and case files for so many years, and because of the sensitivity of some of this, has to remain in evidence. There's some things that we can essentially farm out to bonded storage facilities, but we are at a complete loss of space downstairs in evidence and storage. All right. So this is our lobby. This is the main entrance of the building, and this is really where everything happens. And I'm going to reiterate that we have 22,000 calls for service. We have a busy police station. We're very unique in our area. We're different than our sister towns that lie around us just because of our geographical location, our commercial development, and the types of calls that we get. So in this lobby, what you see here is you see the records office, or the records room to the window to the left, and then the darker room is the dispatch room. So this is the type of business we have that are coming into this lobby on a daily basis. We have child exchanges, because, and there's a lot of them, there's more than you can even imagine. So husbands and wives that really can't exchange their children civilly will come to the police station under court order, and they'll come into the business. This is where sex offenders come into the building, where they have to register. This is where people coming in looking for accident reports come in. This is where people come in potentially to with appointments with me and other personnel for pistol permits or other business in the building, and it's really an inadequate space. There's also in there, and one of the notes that I put in there, we have a drug and needle drop-off location in there, so it's a very busy part of the building that was. At the time, I'm sure it was, the design was well thought out, but not knowing how we would expand with the types and number of calls, no one could have foreseen. Now, this is the booking area. We've modified the booking area a few times over the lifespan. I was fortunate enough to be one of the new officers that walked into the building for the first time, and I think the first week we were there, we learned that the prisoners could shut the lights off as soon as they came in through the door in the lower cell room. They put the light switches right where the prisoners were seated, locked up to the wall. So we had to make some modifications. If you look on top of the counter, the booking counter, that's the cell block that is here, and this is the booking counter. All of the breath testing equipment and the computers were originally on top, and as you could probably imagine, that was problematic. A lot of that equipment with unruly prisoners ended up on the floor, so we had to recess a lot of the equipment underneath the counter, and facilities was able to help us out with that. Right now, as it stands, we can really only safely book one prisoner at a time, and many times we come in with multiple prisoners, which is problematic for that particular location. What you're looking at here in this room is our communications director, Penny Ryan, who's seated in the audience with her husband. And we She shares an office with our records clerk, and as you can see in that room, we are at full capacity. The next slide that you see was originally the kitchen, and where you see all these file cabinets was a kitchen table and was a dining area for the police officers when they would come in, because we're obviously 24/7 would come in. And, let me just hit that backwards. Would come in, and because we ran out of file and storage space, we removed the kitchen table, added a copy machine, added the file cabinets, and that's essentially the dining area for the officers. So what you're looking at here, this is the sergeant's office, which is shared by 5 police sergeants. And we are at max capacity for storage. We don't have a quartermaster's area to secure equipment that's issued to the officers. This is clearly a fine example of Sergeant Charlton has a very messy desk.
Do a lot of stuff.
This right here, just so what everybody's looking at, this is also in the sergeant's office. Now, this piece of computer equipment is what records all of the 911 calls and all the radio dispatches from the police officers. And we access that almost on a daily basis with record requests and requests from the district attorney's office for cases that we have. And we've really utilized every bit of space to encompass all of this equipment. Now, my predecessor, Mark, talks about this all the time. At the time when we went into the building, the former Chief Stone, then Sergeant Stone, was smart enough to realize that computers were the up and coming. Now, when we moved to this building, we had no idea what type of technology explosion was going to happen. So Bill Stone, on his own, outside of the contractor, ran Cat5 cable throughout the building. And he ran it throughout the building, and thank God that he did. So we were able to become technologically capable with what we needed. If you looked up in the ceilings now, it looks like a complete spider web of cables and wires and things. There were no chases that were built into the building for incorporating any of this technology. Again, another picture of the evidence room. Now, this is downstairs in the lower portion of the building. This is dead record storage, and space is obviously very limited. The reports have to be stored for many years, and as you can see, this giant humidifier down here, we learned the first year that because ventilation wasn't adequate at the time, it was problematic. We had problems in the armory with the firearms and evidence firearms that were rusting. And we started to have mold issues, so they put the High-E-Dry in there to take care of some of the problems, and that's the drain hose that runs across the floor. We had a water leak when the pipes froze in the building, which was devastating to the police department because the water essentially flooded 2 whole floors. In that particular location, we lost a lot of records that were down there. There were some that we were able to retain a lot, all those records that you see right there, we are at full capacity. We're even storing water, drinking water downstairs in this particular area. So what you're looking at here is this is the Sally Port. And it's very telling. You can't open the doors of the cruisers. Even if you park perfectly, you can't open the door of the cruisers without hitting the walls. And obviously they put the lollipop in the middle, which is also problematic. Now, the Sally Port, you may look at it as a garage, but it's really not. We use it for prisoner intake, prisoner security. We use it for storage for our equipment, our motorcycles. We have washer fluid, things like that downstairs. So it's a multi-use, multi-function facility. We'll use it for if we have a vehicle that's evidence in a crime, whether maybe it's a major crime or a minor crime, where we have to have our BCI people come in and process a vehicle. And that's why we have to get it out of the elements in this particular area. So this is a 2-bay sally port that, let's see, I know I have a photo in here. We can't even get an ambulance in the facility, and which poses a problem for security. Believe it or not, prisoners don't want to be in jail. They know now that they can say, I don't feel well, they'd rather be in a warm bed in a hospital. So and we can't get an ambulance, so the doors have to remain open. We have to remove the prisoners from the cell, bring them outside, and get them into the ambulance, which poses a security issue for the police station. Now, what you're looking at here, that's the generator that runs the building in case of an emergency. And now remember, this particular facility, this is our police station, this is our emergency operations center. So what the EOC means is if the big bad things happens, if we have an emergency weather event, a tornado, a hurricane, a major snow event, all the town parties, the town manager, the fire, police, emergency management, this is where they're going to go. So this is the generator that runs the facility. They put the generator so close to the police station, when the generator starts, it fills the police station with smoke. Now, again, I'm sure it was something that was overlooked. They've tried to modify it. They extended the exhaust stack above the building, but that is problematic. Just behind that, you can see a storage shed that we purchased to the town years ago just to store tires, vehicle equipment, car seats for our car seat grant programs that we give out to the people and install. And we are really lacking space in that part of the lot and behind the building. This is the female locker room. As you can see, open the door, and there's clearly a privacy issue as you open the door to the female locker room. It's small and problematic and probably not the best design. This IT closet inside the communication center, that volley of wires that are in there, that closet was never designed for IT equipment. We actually have IT equipment, communications equipment, and computers that encompass 3 floors. The next slide will be able to show that a little bit better. So this right here, what you see here, this is the state 911 system. That particular stack of computers is $1 million. Okay, and that runs the 911 system. The room that's in, if you can look at the design, that room was designed and built for the prisoners to be removed from their cells to meet with their attorneys that came into the building. So what we ended up having to do was we ended up having to utilize that room once the enhanced 911 system came into place. They removed the sprinkler head, they put the 911 system in downstairs, and that room no longer functions for the purpose that it was designed for. The other side of that is right here. You can actually see through the glass the 911 system. The officers are using that for storage because, again, going back to having no locker space or areas for the officers to keep their equipment. This is a great picture of the ambulance here actually to pick up a prisoner that can't access inside the building, can't park inside the building. Modern police facilities now are built so the ambulance can safely and adequately back into the building. The sally port could be closed to prevent any chance of the prisoner escaping. So now we're back to the communication center activity. 2018 here, we noted there was 4,255 911 calls that comes in. We're a busy police department. As of the date of this slide, there were 5,004 to date. They average a lot of calls, 8,000 visitors annually throughout the building. It's a very, very busy police facility. As Chief Coleman said, I encourage anybody that's in this room or anybody that's in the watching audience to come down to the police station. We'd be happy to show you the facility and where we're at. Now, we're undergoing right now some modifications and some upgrades into the communication center. Originally, this room was designed for 1 dispatcher. I walked you through the history and told you why we had to go to 2, essentially overnight. When there's a prisoner check to be done, one of the two dispatchers will get an alert, and they'll go downstairs to the lower level, and they'll check the prisoners. Right now, we're actually building a third station, a third desk for a third communications person in there because the call volume sometimes dictates that, especially during major events such as major weather events, snowstorms, things of that nature. So what this is showing you, this was showing you the communications center. This area right here was the bathroom that was inside communications. This bathroom was for specifically communications people. We had no room. We talked about it. The communications director worked with the personnel, and they decided to remove the bathroom to put in a third center. As you can see, the work that's being done. And that's the conceptual design of the communications center. So that's how it looks if you walk in the building right now in the communications center. One of the issues that we have in there is, as you can see with all the screens in there, we're out of space. And the town and the police department monitor many, many, many screens. We're talking over 100 different video feeds into that particular center. We are completely out of space. The design at the time didn't really take into mind that we have quarry and criminal offender record information that can't be viewed from the lobby area. So that has become problematic. We tried for a long period of time. They darkened the glass, but then people would come in off the street and they'd be squinting in through the glass. They didn't even know if we were working in there. So we've tried to make some design changes and things to make it work. Again, the communications director, Penny Ryan, and the records clerk share this particular area, and you can see the close proximity of their desks, and they are essentially on top of each other. So that's really it. I want to again reiterate, I think the history shows that Chief Miller at the time knew we needed to get out of that facility. There was about a $3 million expenditure considering the sale of the old police station, which bought us 20 years. Not only did it buy us 20 years, it enabled the town, it gave us a facility to use and enabled the town to build a couple of schools in the meantime, which were desperately needed by the town. And, but we're out of space. There's no room. It's an adequate facility for the police department. You will hear more from the architectural company that came in, Tecton, that came in and looked at it. They tipped it upside down, looked at it sideways to see if there was any modifications that we could do to make it bigger or expand it, and it's just not possible at that particular location. And for edification for the public that's listening, the hopes are, because it's a facility that's up and running and works, that it could be repurposed for another town department. Does anybody have any questions? Hope I didn't bore everybody to death. So.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Folks from Tecton do the final presentation.
Good evening. My name's Matt Salad. I'm an architect with Tecton Architects out of Hartford, Connecticut. With me is Dennis Ross of Pacheco Ross Architects. They specialize in a lot of fire facilities. We specialize in a lot of police stations. So we partner together on a lot of these public safety facilities to make sure that the town is getting the best expertise in both aspects of that, because they're very specialized typologies as far as architecture goes, and we want to make sure that you guys are really getting what the town and what the departments really deserve. So this is a little bit of our team. Jeff McRave is our Director of Public Safety. He's not here with us tonight, and Rebecca Hopkins is another team member. We've been working with this committee here since they formed in August, but we've been working with the town for just over a year, I believe, working with the departments to make sure that we're going through and understanding their needs, what's happened in the past, what sort of growth the town has seen, and what sort of growth the town is anticipating, so that we're not doing another 20-year facility, we're doing a 50-year facility that's really going to get the town the most value now and going forward into the future. So these are the three sites as diagrams, just to highlight a couple of pieces of it. As Lieutenant Lemon had highlighted, the police headquarters, that site is maxed out. They're only using about a third of the site, but the rest of it is occupied by wetlands and is really too narrow to develop. We looked at expanding the existing building to its maximum footprint, and it doesn't meet the department's needs now. Additionally, we'll get into it a little bit further as we go through this presentation. Public safety facilities really have a higher standard for their structural requirements. They're what's considered an essential services facility, and that means that the seismic and wind loads that those buildings have to be designed to are greater of that of any other building that is going to be in the public market. And the reason is, if there is a natural disaster and a lot of damage happens, a hurricane, tornado, those kind of things, the public safety facilities need to still have the lights on and need to be operational to make sure that the public is safe. The police headquarters was designed as a wood frame building. It's load-bearing masonry on the lower level. It does not meet those structural codes. As Lieutenant Lemon alluded to, it would be adequate for a different building type, but it is not structurally code compliant with modern-day code. Chief Coleman had alluded to the fire headquarters, very tight site shared with the park in a FEMA floodway. So there's a lot of issues with that and with insurance and any work going forward on that site. And then fire station number 2, the West Station. It's also a very small site. It's shared with the school. It being a renovated school building, it was designed for students and chairs and tables and not 50,000 pound pieces of equipment on the slab. So the floor structure isn't designed to support that kind of equipment, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through this. A little bit about our process. We've been working with the departments for over a year now to really program this out and make sure that we're meeting their needs. So we had many meetings with most of members of both police and fire departments to make sure that we were understanding how both departments operate, and then how they anticipate operating into the future. We want to make sure that we're doing our best guess to anticipate how trends are going to change and how technology is going to change and how that integrates into the building. You know, as Lieutenant Lemon had stated, we didn't understand 20 years ago the amount of technology that was going to be going into these spaces. That communications equipment, those servers, we're doing rooms that are about 200 square feet to support that in a modern police facility of these sizes, because there's so much information and data. They're monitoring not just their own facility, but all the cameras at schools and things like that around the town. So there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And with that, Dennis is going to speak a little bit to best practices for fire station design.
Which way is forward? This guy? Good evening. Thank you, everyone. Dennis Ross, president of Pacheco Ross Architects. So I've got a whole passel of slides here, and I'm going to really not talk slide by slide by slide. I'll run through them. They all kind of concentrate on the same thing, and I'm going to make a fairly definitive statement. The fire stations, both of them, have lived their useful lives. There's absolutely no reason to try to renovate, add on, use those sites to make them work. And one of the reasons, in fact, all of the reasons, have to do with what's on these slides. So what is on these slides? All right. What's on these slides is all about health, safety, welfare. All right, and as both chiefs and Matt have alluded to, all right, from 1964 to now, things have changed. All right, but what's changed? First of all, none of the stations meet any kind of code or regulation. They don't meet ADA accessibility. We have gender equity issues. We have regulations that they follow, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. Police follow other regulations. They don't meet any of that. And to give you some solid examples of what that really means, of things not to do in a station, which is exactly what exists today, and how you solve that through holistic design and create what you should be doing today. What you should be doing today, and I'm going to give you some examples, is separation of what Chief Coleman alluded to, all right? You've got carcinogens out there on the fire scene. We're in a hazmat scene. Even when the police go to a scene and they handle a prisoner or somebody outside, you don't know what bloodborne pathogens you're getting dealt with, carcinogens that are getting on the turnout gear. This is a field of study, not just a trend, but it's an entire field of study that's worldwide. It's not just this country, I can tell you right now, having visited and seen many European stations, they're probably 10 years ahead of us in this. So this is a worldwide trend in the protection, health, safety, and welfare of responders. And what we're talking about is cancer. Cancer, PSTD, or PTSD, I'm sorry, sleep deprivation, health and well-being, and creating this environment in these stations. And to try to do that, and what you saw in these existing facilities, is next to, if not totally impossible. So let's talk about carcinogens. It used to be an absolute badge of honor for firefighters back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, even the early 2000s, that when they came back from an actual fire and their gear smelled, it was like, hey, I fought a fire, you know? Hang that gear up, you know? I fought a fire, I feel good. Take me and all those carcinogens home, infect my family, my car, everything I touch, I ride in, the bed I sleep in, everything is contaminated. What we found is that there are ways to control this contamination, and we as architects actually can design physical facilities to help make that control happen. You've got what we call the hot side of the building, which is bays, bay support spaces, anything that's exposed to those carcinogens, the vehicles, the PPE, personal protective equipment or gear, tools, equipment, single contained breathing air, any of those things that might be exposed, we have try to separate into what we call the hot zone. Then we create these transition zones where you can move between clean or cold zones, living environment, office environment, and the hot zone, and create these movement corridors where we can make it so responders coming from a cold zone to a hot zone and then going back again can clean themselves, you know, with simple things like walk-off mats, hand sanitizers, just a simple bench where they can sit down and remove dirty shoes and put on clean shoes. If they're wearing a dirty uniform, a place where they can at least shower off very quickly, hang up the dirty one to be laundered, pick up a clean one, move to the clean zone. All these things are happening, and they're happening worldwide. And we as architects need to control them. And for all the shortcomings you saw, the two buildings that exist today, there really is no physical way to make that happen, in addition to all the other space problems and issues that they're having with these buildings. So with that said, these slides really kind of sum that up. You know, we're talking about recent trends. Other recent trends, clearly gender equity. Back in '64, I'm sure there was no women in the fire department. Now there's plenty of women in the fire department, not just as firefighters, but as EMTs, paramedics, cross-trained, and they need space. So we're talking about shared space, private space, how to deal with this space. You can see here's a simple shower. It's ADA accessible. A lot of you probably have a question of, why does a fire station have to be ADA accessible? These folks have to be, you know, active and able to respond. That's correct. However, these are public buildings. The ADA is not a code. It is federal law. These are Title II public spaces, and they have to be 100% inside and outside ADA accessible. We're also trying to create spaces that make sense, you know, when we do these things, for comfort, ADA, good learning environment, just natural light, natural surfaces, things that are easy to clean. We're looking at all these different situations. as we go through here, these are just examples of things we're doing. We're trying to find how to use overlapping space. I'll give you 4 examples. This is a corridor in a station we did. You can see the lockers are out in the corridor. Why? Because that way when you do shift change, if somebody's been on an all-night call and they're asleep, the person coming in to shift change can use the locker, not have to actually go into the room and disturb a responder, right? Sounds simple, but it promotes sleep deprivation, it screws up their rhythms, and it leads to a lot of physical issues. So it's just simple things like that. The other thing I want to mention, and I think everybody's kind of mentioned it and alluded to it, but because we're trying to look at a 50 to 75-year building here, and we've already had all the same problems from 64 to now, all right, where the building just didn't make it, the things that we look at with Tecton and we work very hard for is what we call current and future flexibility, all right? That doesn't just mean adding space. Yes, you might have to add a bay in the future because we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. But it's also about designing systems and designing the interior of the building so that 10 years from now, assuming it gets built, 10 years from now, they don't have to start ripping down walls and creating new spaces. It's the idea that the infrastructure and systems in that building can handle flexibility and change. And we know there's going to be change. There's always change. I mean, I hate to bring this up, but 9/11 changed every bit of security in the way they operate, they being the fire department and probably police too. That changed everything. Move fast forward, all right? They're training. All right, the fire department is now training in what we call MCI, mass casualty incidents. These are horrible incidents, but they happen. All right, what's the next horrible thing that's coming up that they have to train for, get equipment for, new apparatus? We don't know yet, but it's certainly out there. So we're trying to make these spaces as flexible as we can. You can see here, there is a proper gear dryer. Chief didn't mention it just because he's a good guy, but I'll tell you, the cheapest set of gear that they can possibly buy is about $2,000, and that doesn't include boots, gloves, or a hat. That's just jacket and pants. That can go all the way up to $4,000 a set. So for them to spend that kind of money, whether it's grant money or town money, and then have to lay it on ladders, motorcycles, and boats to dry it and try to clean it, go to another station to get it and move it around. Their total investment in that gear is hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it needs to be treated a whole lot differently. So you can see here it's stored in proper lockers where it can dry out. We have dryers, we have special extractors for washing it, we have other wash machines for clothing because we don't want to mix these things up. And then we get into spatial organization, and I'm going to let Matt talk a little bit about that.
All right, so now you know how to design a fire station, so it's easy, right?
Piece of cake.
Now we're going to go into the police side and get a little bit of an understanding of what you've seen today of the condition of your current department and what the modern trends are and what we should be really looking for in a modern police station. So the basic organization of a police station is divided into 4 main components. There's dispatch, which is the main desk, public entry, prisoner entry, and staff entry. And the way that those different spaces interface with each other leads to health, safety, and wellness within the police station and better operations as well. The lobby in a public safety facility is the main point in which the public is typically interacting with the police, and there's a lot of things that go on in this lobby, as was alluded to already. This is where people are coming in for their pistol permitting. This is where sex offenders are registering. This is where people are coming in to interview with an officer to talk about domestic abuse and make a complaint. And then this is where they're also going to public training rooms and doing records requests and things like that. So there's a lot of different people coming in here, and there's a lot of paths that are crossing that you may not want crossing as well. We try to make sure that these spaces are comfortable and welcoming, to make sure that the community feels like they're part of the department. After all, it is your building. But there's things that need to be understood as far as the sensitivity between communications of a lot of these different things. There's a lot of research that shows that secondary trauma of children who are with their parents while their mother is making a complaint about domestic abuse is reliving that trauma because they have to sit there in the interview room. So sometimes we like to do family support services and family support spaces in this as well, so you can actually separate out some of those things. So you're not causing more issues, you're actually helping the public. The community training room, if you take a tour, they have one now. It's very echoey in there. It's very hard to hear if you're in the back of the room and somebody's presenting from the front. In police departments, these have multiple uses. They're not just for officer training. They'll do regional training. The public will come in and use the space as well. And then this typically doubles as your emergency operations center. So when there's a nasty event going on or a large weather event, this is where all the departments will come together, and they'll set up their workstations and be able to dispatch various departments to any sort of critical issue that's going on out there. Lots of technology goes into these spaces, and they need to be secure and safe. And they need to be flexible because they're going to be used in a variety of different ways, and they're a real public asset. The dispatch center, so the one that you saw earlier obviously was all cluttered together. You saw monitors on the walls. There's a lot of critical things that happen within these dispatch centers. This is when you're going to make a call. This is the first point of contact that you have that's going to be getting you help in the need of an emergency. The standard for the design of these communication centers is what's called NFPA 1221. And this requires that these spaces are 2-hour fire rated, ballistic separated from the public, and are secure. We need to make sure that if there's any incidents that happen within the police station itself, like a fire, that the dispatchers are able to shut down their operations and transfer it to another facility to make sure that this town isn't without dispatch capabilities. There's a lot that goes into the design of that. And it doesn't go down to just putting a server in a closet. Like I said, the modern communications equipment rooms are almost 200 square feet. You don't want to locate them remotely or put them in the one closet here or an interview room there. They need to be centrally located. There's a lot of sensitive equipment that goes in there, and they need to be flexible for future expansion. So we typically like to have them located right next to, above, or below the dispatch center so that when you're going to make those modifications in the future, it's easy, cheap, and doesn't affect the operations while those renovations are going on. At the same time, dispatcher health, wellness, and safety is really important. Mental health and PTSD is a big issue when they have calls, so making sure that they have safe spaces. If they've taken a difficult call, they have one of the highest rates of workman's comp claims in a department as well. So the furniture and everything needs to be taken into special consideration to make sure that that they're comfortable and able to perform their duties properly. We had presented earlier that the generator, when it kicks on, makes the entire police station smell like smoke. Studies have shown that CO2 levels under 600 parts per million in schools help to improve students' ability to learn. So we incorporate that same sort of research into the dispatch center, because if the dispatcher is able to cognitively perform better, they're able to dispatch aid better at the same time. Some of the open officer spaces, so these are some of the administrative offices, patrol and report prep. So when an officer has made an arrest or done a traffic stop, this is where they're going to be preparing all their reports. Break, roll call, and meeting spaces, making sure they have room to do a lot of these different functions in a flexible environment, which allows us to reduce the number of rooms and compartmentalization of the department, builds more camaraderie amongst the officers, and allows us to have a more efficient building. And then modern lockers. You saw the locker rooms before. They were crowded, cramped, things were piled on them. Modern lockers now have a built-in bench so they can change. They're wide enough to accommodate all their gear. They have radios, flashlights, phones, all these things need to be charged, so these lockers actually have power within them. And there's a lot of gear that comes in wet, bulletproof vests, things like that. I don't know if any of you guys have kids that are in hockey. Their hockey bags stink pretty bad. These lockers do too. So these are actually tied and ducted into a plenum, so they're actually vented to make sure that we're not getting mold and things like that on the officers' gear. And then some of the secure spaces, we looked at that cluttered evidence room. Evidence receiving, chain of custody is a huge issue, especially in older departments. We need to make sure that evidence is coming into the station, being bagged, tagged, and processed properly for the evidence officer to handle, so that that chain of custody isn't broken and that evidence doesn't become an issue when prosecuting a case. So we'll have multiple areas where this occurs. This one on the top left is actually a lab, so that's where they'll do fingerprinting and things like that. So that's where an investigative detective would be processing some of that evidence. They'll then put it into these lockers here on the top left. Those are pass-through lockers. They put it in, and the only other person that can take it out is the evidence officer to make sure that chain of custody isn't broken. And again, the one on the right, that's another location where we would have that. There's refrigerators in these. They can accommodate all sorts of various size pieces of evidentiary material, weapons, things like that. So it needs to be able to accommodate just about anything. All the way on the right, proper interview rooms. I don't think you have one right now because it's where the E911 server is. This is where an officer needs to be able to interview a detainee. This is where a lawyer needs to interact with that detainee, and bail bondsmen as well. So there's a lot of different functions that goes on with these interview rooms. And there's 3 different interview rooms typically in a police station. There's one off of the cell area for a prisoner. There's one off of a detective's area for multiple interrogations. And then there's the one that the public uses for licensing, permitting, and making personal complaints, and they all have to be designed specifically to meet those functions. The one that you're seeing here is one that's in a cell area, so it has detention grade furniture. It's built like a cell. You can't escape. It has panic devices, so if an officer is in need of assistance, they can push a button and they'll have aid called to them to make sure that they're safe. This on the bottom left here is a Sally port. So you saw how the separation of all of the equipment that was in the Sally port of the existing is just out on the floor. If we're going to do that and combine it with a maintenance garage, we're going to separate that with a wire mesh partition or a wall. All of those things that were in that department, a prisoner could, if he gets away from an officer and isn't cuffed, can grab a hold of one of those things, use it as something to grab onto as a weapon, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So they need to be basically completely empty, and then at the same time, they need to be sized appropriately. You need to be able to get an ambulance in here, open the doors of the ambulance, and bring and wheel out a stretcher, because if there's a medical emergency that a prisoner has, they have to be able to be taken to get medical care. Keep in mind, innocent until proven guilty, these detainees are not convicted criminals at this point. They're still innocent citizens, so they need to be treated as such. And then just proper storage, making sure we have enough space, that everything isn't cluttered. Again, another image of a properly designed Sally port. The other spaces here in the bottom left and top right corners, that's a proper prisoner processing area with a holding cell. This is the fingerprinting machine, so that's where you're doing your intake for your intoxilizer, breathalyzer test, your mugshotting, your fingerprinting. This is a holding cell, and off of that holding cell, there's a processing area where the prisoner has all their paperwork and things like that filled out. It's not just an open desk. There's a screen here. A lot of times when you're making an arrest, it's not just you're going and cuffing the guy. Sometimes they fight back and struggle, and they can be injured. And if that prisoner has a cut lip and has an infectious disease, one of the first things they might try to do is spit into that officer's face and try to get them sick as well. So we need to make sure that the officers are safe during those incidents. Proper cell design. We were talking about cell checks, 15 and 30 minutes. 15 minutes is for a suicide risk. The first 24 hours of incarceration is the highest likelihood in which a person will try to do harm to themselves. So one of the major things that the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts is concerned about is the safety of that prisoner and making sure that they can't commit suicide. All the way down at the end of this cell block is a little card reader. It's placed in a location where whoever's doing that cell check has to go past every single cell and look into it to make sure that somebody's not hurting themselves. 15 minutes is the time it takes for you to tie a ligature, hang yourself, and begin to lose brain cells. So that's a critical time to make sure that you're getting down there and saving that person in case they do try to do harm to themselves. Resiliency. So we talked about that these have to be designed to a higher standard than most other buildings. On a modern police station or fire station, you're going to see a big generator. This one is actually in Sutton, Massachusetts, small town just up the road here. And that's a big generator. And the reason is because these facilities need to be, by code, maintained for 72 hours of runtime when they lose power continuously with an uninterruptible power supply. So we can't connect this to gas out on the street. It's got to be diesel fuel, self-contained within the unit itself. Proper mechanical spaces. One of the things that we didn't talk about with the police station is the main intake louver for all the air handling equipment is down next to the basement behind a hill. All the leaves, debris, and dust and everything like that gets sucked into the police station and is causing issues with the HVAC equipment all the time. So making sure that all of those systems are properly designed and properly laid out so that they function well is important. And then making sure that they're redundant. You don't just put one boiler in, you put two boilers in, and you alternate them so they last longer, and if one fails, the station isn't going to go down in the middle of winter with frozen pipes. And then making sure the building is safe. We need to make sure that you can't just drive a car up and crash it into the side of the building, because people, if they have the opportunity to, some people in every community will try to do harm to officers, and it's pretty incredible the amount of times that occurs. And then we want to just briefly touch on department consolidation, doing a joint public safety facility versus standalone facilities. Currently, you have 3 buildings. Each one of those buildings has 3 of the same things: lobbies, bathrooms, mechanical rooms, some form of fitness room and training areas. By combining all of these facilities into a single public safety facility, you're eliminating all that duplication of space and use and maintenance. And so it reduces your upfront costs and it reduces your life cycle costs as well. At the same time, you don't build 3 buildings at the same time. You build them in phases. Construction cost escalation has outpaced inflation over the past 20 years and averages 4% per year. So if you were to do each building one after another, you're looking at millions of dollars additionally that you're going to have to pay for each project. Additionally, there's reduced site costs, and there's better department coordination. Some towns, police and fire, they don't get along too good. I don't know why. You guys are all great people. This town, they do. There's great coordination between both departments, and they'd actually do really well together as a single facility. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions and feedback that anybody from the public has.
Any questions?
I have one real quick question.
You just state up, just to quickly identify who you are.
So my name's Rick Owen. I know, Chief, in the past we talked about your desire to kind of maintain to maintain the 2 locations, and I know now we're looking at a combined, facility. I just wondered if you could touch on, sort of how you came to that conclusion.
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. This is something that we've had much dialogue with the committee on, and basically what it comes down to is response times. Right now, as a department handling, what will probably wind up being a little over 3,800 calls this year, greater than 90% of the time, we have less than a 4-minute response time to those calls. So response time is critical for a lot of reasons, for obvious reasons. I have said from the beginning on this project that I am all for a single public safety facility, providing that we can find the right location where there is not going to be a dramatic increase one way or the other from District 1, which is this end of town, versus District 2, which is West Street. So Deputy Chief Johnson has done a phenomenal job with a response time study that he shared with this committee. We can certainly make that available. So Are there advantages to 2 stations? There are, especially when it comes to response times. Are there advantages to a single station? Certainly, probably more. But for me, it's going to come down to response times. If we can find the right location that's centrally located, that we are still going to be able to maintain the phenomenal response times that we have, I'm all for that. But it's going to have to be the right site.
Sir?
In the largest town meeting, precinct 4. Chief, quick question. Didn't mean to make you sit down and get up. With these 300-plus units going in at the west side of town, is it suitable to keep a west end, west side, versus a central? I mean, you're saying it's the response time. That's going to be a lot of units in one spot. I mean, if it hits the fan down there, you're going to be stressed right out.
Again, great question. So for those that don't know, Eastland Partners, the Board of Selectmen recently approved for them to move forward with a 320-unit housing development off of Blaker Street that will be phased in over a 3-year period. So it'll be approximately 100 units a year until it's completely built out. Our estimates, this is something that we've studied very closely. We provided information to town administration as well as the Board of Selectmen. I estimate that once that project is completely built out with the residents that will be occupying them, that'll be somewhere around, a 2.5% to 3% increase on our total call volume, with approximately 100 additional calls a year. So it roughly paces out to about 1 every 4 days. Now, again, this is what I said in the earlier statement. Is it necessary to have, a West Street fire station, just because of a new 320-unit housing development? Maybe, but what we're looking at right now in terms of what our response time data is showing is that there are areas that are, centrally located that it's not going to affect the response times, out to West Street. I have to look at the community as a whole. I appreciate the question. It's a great question. It's something that's, being talked about now. I have to look at the response times for the community as a whole in every corner of the community. Certainly, we take projects like that into consideration, but for me, it wouldn't be the driving force to construct a fire station in a location because of 320 additional units. I'm looking at the town in total and how our response times are going to be affected with a single location to all corners of the community.
Thank you. And thank you, Board, for taking the time to do this. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, thank you to all of our presenters tonight. If we don't have any other questions, let me just quickly go over some stuff relative to what this committee has done to date, where we've been. So like I said, we did the tours. We received some of the same information that you folks did. Some of us came in with, preconceived notions on various sites and what the existing facilities were or weren't and what could be done. And we all, I think, even with some of our backgrounds, knowing some of these facilities well or at a glance, sort of got a pretty good education on what they involved. So to date, we've looked at and voted and determined through the committee that none of the current facilities are adequate in their current state. So as they stand right now, those facilities, for all of the reasons and others that were presented in these PowerPoints, do not currently meet the needs of these 2 public safety agencies. None of them are capable, on their current sites, are capable of expansion, whether it's for, as the professionals here pointed out, due to regulations and codes and federal grants because of flood zones and a whole variety of reasons, or just being on a site that was probably too small from the get-go. They're not capable of expansion, so that was another determination we made here. Our recommendation in an ideal world, is for a single public safety facility, to combine the police and both fire facilities into one public safety facility. But like the chief said, that's based on factors in identifying an ideal site. If that doesn't come to fruition, then we'll probably come back and have further conversations as to what that means if we can't come up with the ideal site. We did review a bunch of sites, and through the architects, provided us a lot of information on sites and the feasibility of those sites. Right now, it has been just looking at the sites. There have really been no costs looked at those sites. Basically, looking at the sites, were they, number one, within the response zones that the deputy chief put together? You know, would they meet the square footage, the accessibility, things of that nature? So some sites which seemed good on the face, after talking to the architects, were eliminated because they did not, whether they were in flood zones or things of that nature. We had some sites that we've taken off the table and we will not look at any further. We've determined a couple sites to be ideal sites based on the square footage, as well as the square footage, as well as the response times. And other sites, feasible, not ideal. So they're still on the table should things not go in the direction, whether they're not sites that are able to be obtained through the variety of public processes, or, you know, cost. They just, you know, they're out of our price range, you know, so those, you know, if those ideal sites don't work out for us, we have some other ones that are on the back burner. Anybody on the committee have anything that I missed as relative to the work we've done to date, or things that we've agreed on? I think those are the things that we've primarily agreed on to date. You know, we've taken a lot of information, and, you know, this is where we are, but we certainly know this is a fluid process based on, and I think the town manager referenced at the beginning, this, we've got a long ways to go in this process before it's presented to, you know, town meeting in the town to see which direction they want to go in. But, you know, the public input was a big, very important piece for all of us up here, and hopefully we'll have continued public input. Before I take your question, Mr. Largis, I just want to, the town has set up an email address. If you've got folks out there who want more information, please have them, you know, we'd rather have them get correct information, reach out to one of us, reach out to town, you know, town management, the police chief, Lieutenant Lemon, the fire chief, deputy chief. We make every effort to give correct information we can. I've heard both offer up tours of their facilities, so take them up on that. It's a little bit eye-opening. So there is an email address for anybody that wasn't able to make it tonight, might be watching at home, may see this online, and they want to give sort of input as to a direction they'd like to see us go, or different avenues they'd like to see us explore. And we'll list that on the town site, but I'll just read it off real quick. It's public safety, one word, at town.auburn.ma.us. Again, public safety at town.auburn.ma.us. We'll work to make sure that the presentations seen here tonight, the PowerPoints, we'll get those posted online. We'll see if we can get a folder of some sort along with that email address. We'll see if Mr. Hugo can put a link to the meeting tonight, so those that weren't able to watch or be here, you know, can have as much input as possible to the process. Mr. Largis?
Yes, but I've heard it mentioned a couple times, the flood zone that the Auburn Street fire station's in. What year flood zone is that?
I'll defer to the architects. They had the...
Because I'm looking at it as the high school is actually lower in elevation than the fire station.
Yeah, so it's actually it's not actually a flood zone like a 200 or 500 year flood plain. It's a FEMA floodway. So during a large rain event, that's actually where, if Auburn Pond was to overflow, that's where the water would actually be flowing through. So it's not a flood plain. It's actually a higher regulated zone than that.
So the chances of that flooding are going to be slim to none. I mean, I've been in town 51 years.
Yeah, but
I've never seen it go.
But it
Auburn Street flood.
right. Yeah, but it's not something that's regulated like a floodplain. It's regulated federally under FEMA. And it's something where if we were to do work on that site, that we would have to work with FEMA to get the maps either redrawn or elevate the site up. And since there's such a small amount of space between the building and the street, raising the building up out of that floodway just really isn't feasible.
If I can just chime in. I've worked with FEMA before, both in floodways and flood zones, and FEMA has a thing called a directed move, all right? So if you're in a zone or in a floodway, such as the current building is, they will ask you to do what's called a directed move, meaning move your facility, get it out of there, all right? If there's absolutely, positively no other place and no other way to move it, then they're going to look for mitigation factors such as resiliencies, walls, raising the site. All those are compromises because there are places to move it. So rather than undergo, the difficulty of dealing with FEMA, and it is a difficulty, we're taking the avenue that moving it is by far the best route.
Anyone else?
Any other questions or things to present? Matt, do you have, I see you flipping through paperwork over there.
I'll just see if I have that map.
Okay. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I'll take a motion to adjourn. If we should set another, actually, before we do that, we should set our, why don't we do another 2-week out meetings? Actually, where do we put, so does that put us for, it's getting close to the,
November 20th.
When's this?
I believe there's Finance Committee on the 20th. We're not going to go, do we want to push out,
Then show up the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. If you move it the next week, it's the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving.
I know, so I'm thinking maybe December 4th. We'll stick with the Wednesdays, we'll go back to 6 o'clock for our next meeting, does that work?
Do the 20th and just do an hour meeting.
So 4th?
I can see that. Okay, the 4th? Okay, we'll do December 4th, 6 PM. And again, it'll be a public meeting. Everybody's always welcome to the meetings. The schedule will be on the website as well. And thank you for coming. We'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.